Hello and welcome back to Music with Mascots. It's a sad day today. Yesterday, Ralph Towner died. Ralph Towner was an amazing guitar player, multi-instrumentalist. He was also a pianist. Got his start in the late 60s with the Paul Winter Consort. Then he formed the band Oregon, with whom he collaborated and played for the rest of his life, I think, doing solo albums, collaborating with many jazz artists, focusing on acoustic music, playing nylon string guitars, 12-string guitars. His music was just gorgeous. There were some pieces that I didn't like here and there, but overall, I loved his music. I found it beautiful. I found it intellectually stimulating. I found it enjoyable to play, to study, to listen to. I just wanted to talk a little bit about Ralph Towner, just because I've listened to so much of his music over the years. I want to take a little different approach than probably all the other jazz channels that are going to talk about him will. I'm just going to show you a couple of the albums that he did. This is Slideshow with Gary Burton. This is a great album. I have a bunch of his solo albums off to the side somewhere, set aside in the next pile to be washed. I couldn't quickly find those. Sorry. But I got some of his Oregon albums. These are all good. Moon and Mind. What a great cover. Great album. Friends. Roots in the Sky. Out of the Woods. Great albums. Great albums. But I wanted to talk about one that just doesn't get talked about in his collaborations with other artists. Probably because the artist he collaborated with here gets overlooked as a jazz artist. And I think I'll probably do a video on that at some point. And that's Bill Bruford. Now, this is on CD, and there's a little water damage to the cover here. This is the album If Summer Had Its Ghosts. This is Bill Bruford with Ralph Towner and Eddie Gomez. Most people that are familiar with Bill Bruford, not as a jazz drummer, are familiar with him from his work with the prog rock group Yes and King Crimson. Later on, he put together Earthworks, which was an acoustic jazz band, and he was the band leader of that. And at one point when he was touring with Crimson, someone came up to him and offered to willing to fund any project he came up with. And someone had suggested that he work with Ralph Towner. And he thought that was just a brilliant idea. And he came up with the idea of also working with Eddie Gomez on an acoustic jazz album. And then he had to present the idea to them, and they agreed to it. This was the album that came out of that collaboration. And it's wonderful. It's a wonderful acoustic jazz album, a fusion of three personalities. Bruford did most of the composing, but there's a lot of improvisation here. And I want to read you two things from Bill Bruford's Autobiography that he says about Ralph Towner. Ralph Towner is a brilliant guitarist and leader of the group Oregon, and a man with whom I made an album in 1996, about which we'll hear more shortly. He had signed to a distinguished German record label, which prefer their artists to record with a particular engineer in a particular studio in Oslo, Norway. Ralph, based in Seattle, Washington, explains that he would arrive after about an 18-hour journey, try and fail to sleep, and face the microphone at 11 a.m. the next day, jet-lagged out of his mind. He'll tell you that his entire body of recorded work had been extracted from him between stifled yawns, and that he has never made a record yet on which he wasn't half asleep. A little hyperbole there, but a delightful little story about Ralph Towner. He talks a little bit about the 4 days in upstate New York that he could afford to have Towner and Eddie Gomez working with him. Now, for those of you that don't know, Eddie Gomez is a brilliant, brilliant upright bass player. And Bruford had met him before and knew him. And had gone to Kansas City to talk to him about the project of working with Ralph Towner. And Eddie Gomez thought that was a great idea. And Towner and Gomez each contributed composition to the work. And Bruford contributed most of the compositional work. Ralph, Eddie, and I finally meet at the Make Believe Ballroom, a small rural studio in West Shokan, New York, in the bitterly cold February of 1997. Owner Tom Mark is our engineer. It's a tiny place, but that suits the intimate nature of the all-acoustic project I have in mind. Recent drummer-led records have all been about muscle and flash, targeted below the groin at a point that part of the drum community that enjoys those kinds of fireworks. But I am after something altogether more poetic, softer, hazy, autumnal. Peter Erskine and Paul Motion are a couple of the very few drummers who could caress you rather than beat you up, and there is an intimacy in the quality of their recent work that I'd like to follow up on with Ralph. 2 or 3 acoustic instruments can fill a huge sonic space on disc, as if the whole aural spectrum is available to them. I want everything played quietly and mixed loud, playing on that falsity of foreground that recording can give you. With titles like Somersaults and Thistledown, I want the music to have a dreamy, secret garden feel. The album will be called If Summer Had Its Ghosts. I can afford to have Ralph and Eddie for 4 days only, and the sessions start promptly at 11 o'clock on Monday. I play some scratchy demos and stretch out some sketchy charts on the table, and we hack our way through the undergrowth as speedily as possible. Right away, I love the sound, and this intimacy agenda is going to work. The downside is going to be the compositions. I have produced too much fussy material, as is common with the amateur writer, gripped by a nervy and mistaken belief that the world will collapse if he doesn't have something to point to and be able to say, play this. Well, working with 2 consummate professionals like Ralph Towner and Eddie Gomez, they come together. They start to work on the 2 compositions that they each brought along with him, and then they work out with the compositions Bruford has brought along, and they put together an absolutely brilliant, brilliant acoustic album. When I think of Ralph Towner, I think of his solo work, but I also think of the work that he did with other people, because so many of the albums that I've listened to over the years are Ralph Towner with someone else, with Oregon, with Bill Bruford, with Eddie Gomez. He did brilliant solo albums, but his work with other people is as remarkable as his solo work. And the 2 bodies of work combined are who Ralph Towner is. And they remind me that jazz music is more than just a person. Any kind of music is more than just a person because it requires listening. It requires active listening. And there's a quote here that Bruford says that I find really, really interesting. See if I can find it. Because Bruford himself is hard to categorize as a musician. And here's where Bill talks about the band, the group coming together after his stuff not quite working. But both my collaborators are sweethearts who give it their all, and things start to pick up after a couple of bleak days with a charming version of Thistledown, which for once was underwritten. We are on surer ground with a piece from Eddie called Amethyst and a booting little rocker from Ralph called Now Is the Next Time. At the end of our 4 days, we were all shattered and the music is all in bits somewhere, but I know we have it. Ralph always struck me as a bit of an outsider, a classically trained musician whose acoustic guitar playing centered on the silver shards of light he could extract from the unwieldy 12-string version of the instrument. If I'm too rock for jazz and too jazz for rock, then he is probably too jazz for classical and too classical for jazz. His most recent recording with his main group Oregon was recorded live in the studio in Moscow with the Moscow Philharmonic. An ambitious project indeed. Tremendous amount of respect there from one musician to another, and a recognition that styles of music do not define a musician. The truly great musicians are beyond definition. That's where the most interesting music can often be found, with the musicians that are pushing boundaries. Ralph Towner pushed boundaries. Give this a listen. It's streamable. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. It's an album that Ralph Towner worked on that I've never heard anyone really talking about when they talk about Ralph Towner. Don't miss it. Again, listen to the music of Ralph Towner. Thank you for joining me on this tribute to him, and listen to as much of his music as you can get. Fill yourself with this music in this time of loss as we say goodbye to another great musician and move on into 2026. Remember, we're sharing this planet with each other. Be kind to each other. And let's move on and listen to music and fill our lives with joy and happiness and treat each other with loving kindness. Thank you very much.